Redditors who have objected at weddings or seen someone object. What happened in the next 5 minutes? Story 1. Lots of laughs. My friend's older brother is a lawyer. He was marrying a lawyer. Most of their friends are lawyers. The officiant was a judge who was a friend of theirs. He and his fiancée thought it would be funny to plant someone in the audience. They got a friend to yell, "I object," to which the judge yelled, "Overruled." It seems to have gone over well for most. But I don't think some of their family members got it. I am dying to see the wedding video of it and not the crappy cell phone version. Story 2. From the last time this was posted, when the pastor got to the part where "forever hold your peace," the bride said, "Yes, I'd like to say something." Then she turned around to her guests and said, "I'd like to thank my maid of honor for sleeping with my fiancé last night." With that, she threw her bouquet and stormed off. The story even made it on the radio at the time. Story 3. Not really an objection, but a friend of mine works at a wedding venue. She told me about one wedding where the best man made some jokes in his speech about the time that he slept with the bride. He assumed that the groom already knew about it. He didn't. The groom was not happy. The reception ended up getting canceled and all the guests were sent home. Story 4. This happened at one of my friend's siblings' weddings. Her parents are super conservative and hadn't gotten the chance to know the daughter's fiancé very well before they got married. In their minds, all that was relevant about him was that he was 10 years older than her and had been previously divorced. They had made subtle and not so subtle comments here and there before the wedding that they weren't happy about it. It should have been a forewarning of what was to come the day of the wedding. Everything was beautiful. Friends, sister, and her fiancé were ecstatic to be getting married and invited friends and family from both sides to their outdoor wedding. All was going well until the preacher asks the audience if anyone has objections to why they should get married. And as serious as can be, dad of the bride stands up and says, "Her mother and I object," and then, after a long hesitation, sits back down. Silence. No one can believe that that just happened. Not knowing exactly how to handle it, the preacher just says okay and finishes the ceremony as planned. I can't even imagine how the bride and groom must have felt. My friend says the tension in the room was unbelievable, but they got married all the same. They just do a lot of avoiding the in-laws, as one might imagine. Story 5. It happened at my wedding. Sort of. My middle brother has a very odd sense of humor that occasionally causes issues. One of those issues is that he likes to whip his balls out at random times and see how long it takes people to notice. The night before the wedding, he told me that at some point during the ceremony he was going to cough loudly, and that would mean his sack was out. I laughed it off. The officiant got to the "speak now or forever hold your peace" bit, and I hear a cough from where my brother was sitting. Both my husband and I whipped around in disbelief, but the audience thought we were daring any of them to say something. I guess so they all laughed. Little did they know what was actually going down in the crowd. Story 6. Oh God, this reminds me of a close friend of mine's wedding. Known this dude for years. We'll call him Ray. Meets a girl. We'll call Katie. She already has a daughter. Cool, right? Was never married to the other dude. Just didn't click. Very amicable separation. Shared custody of the child. No fighting. No demand for child support. Very perfect worldy. Katie was pretty cool and got along with our friend group pretty well. Soon enough, the old boyfriend she had her daughter with becomes best friends with Ray. A couple of years go by. Ray and Katie decide to get married. And around this time, he confides in me that frequently his best friend, that is the daughter's father, all named Jeff, made references to this girl, and there was some vague evidence of it not being as amicable a separation as it seemed. Jeff was pretty quiet about his life and talked about girls pretty often, but we learned later he had actually been holding out for Katie all that time. So assuming Jeff was his best friend, Ray makes him one of the groomsmen along with myself at the wedding. Keeps telling Ray about how great Katie is, not to choke, "I'm here for you," etc. Ray told him to stop because he was psyching him out. So that song and dance is happening, and the ceremony is about to begin. Finally, meet back up with my SO at our table. Katie and Jeff's daughter is playing on the dance floor. Suddenly the music stops and the DJ says, "This song is from Jeff to Katie," and says he still loves her and that it should be him. Cue "It Could Have Been Me" by Billy Ray Cyrus blasting all over the hall. Then Jeff goes up and gets on one knee and asks Katie to dance with him and be his wife. She slaps him. Ray loses his crap and gets in a fight. Cops got called. Wedding ruined. I nope the F times back to the hotel with my so and let them all figure it out on their own. They're divorced now. Story 7. I officiated a wedding where the groom's best man was a work associate. At the reception, they were doing toasts, and the best man gets up and tells a story about how he thought the groom was really gay. I think he thought it would be hilarious, but no one thought it funny, especially the bride. When he was done, the bride's dad stood up and said, "Patrick needs a new best man, and he takers." Folks avoided the guy like the plague for the rest of the night. Story 8. From the last time this was posted, my ex-stepmom was getting married to my cousin. I really like my cousin, and my ex-stepmom is one of the worst people I know, so I tried to talk him out of it. But he was committed. They said their vows and everything. But when the pastor asked if anyone objected, I stood up. I talked about how terrible of a person my ex-stepmom was and how she was tricking my cousin. I practically begged him not to marry her, but he wouldn't even look at me. After a minute of me talking, I realized that everyone else in the room was actively hating me, so I left. They're still married to this day. 5 years. Next Thursday, they seem to be genuinely happy. I'm starting to wonder if I just had the wrong idea about my ex-stepmom. I go over to their house sometimes and eat dinner. Story 9. My dad marrying his third wife. My stepbrother and I were in the wedding party. He was about 6. I was 10. The preacher asked if anyone objects, and my brother raises his hand so very politely. My dad asked why, and my stepbrother replies, "Because I want you to promise to take me fishing whenever I want first." Story 10. I was a waiter for a venue that had a lot of weddings. We typically watched the wedding ourselves from the second floor and waited for everyone to come up for the reception. A guest of the wedding arrived a few hours early, so he sat in the restaurant and had a few too many drinks. He yelled, "Don't F times King do it. Bride's name here, he's a hole." There was the typical gasp by the crowd. Then it was just silence, as people from the bar not part of the wedding, but the bar was outside on the same floor, escorted him out. Really want to know what happened. Story 11. I was at a college buddy's wedding when a drunken childhood friend of the bride tried to stand up and profess his love for her. The bride's father immediately stood up and tried to haul off said drunken guy by the ear, except he was so peeved, he pulled too hard and practically severed the guy's ear. I was also pretty tipsy and laughed a little too hard when the dude screamed like a small girl. But I was not the only one. A few people even applauded. Story 12. And when I was a very young lad, I attended a wedding in which a man stood up at the point of objection and exclaimed, "You forgot the bread knife." For the next 15 years, my brother and I were convinced that it was wedding tradition to have a bread knife, and forgetting it was a mortal sin. Turns out the guy was just nuts. Story 13. My best friend calls me up from out of the blue one day and asks me if I can travel the upcoming weekend to his place from Phoenix to the mountains of northern Arizona. He says he finally popped the question to his for 5 years and mother of his 2 kids, and they are just going to have a small impromptu get-together of friends and family to seal the deal. So I drive 3 hours and show up to his huge family on his lawn, and hers nowhere in sight. I find him and he's trying to hide the fact that he is F times King shook up. Dig a little deeper and find out he hasn't seen the bride in 2 days, and he thinks she's not going to show she's not coming, were his exact words. I calm him down with a couple shots of Patron and assure him she just wants to make a dramatic entrance. She never shows. Bride's mother shows up finally and tells my buddy in private that she took off to Phoenix and has been at an ex's for the last couple of days. He announced his wedding's off to the 30 or so people there, and being the dope Mexican family they are, we all eat and party and piñata the F times out of the rest of the night anyway and blame cold feet. She doesn't come back for 2 months, leaves him with his painting business and the kids to take care of. Then he calls me up and says it's back on. She needed to get some crap out of her system. Objection. Made by yours truly. The only thing she needed to get out of her system was her exes come out of her skanky times T. I couldn't be there, so I just talked crap to her relentlessly online. Anytime she posted anything there, I was reminding her that she's the biggest crap-filled C times on earth for doing that to the best guy I know. They did get married, and she eventually blocked me, and their marriage lasted about 4 more months. I still have dreams about throat-punching her and having the jury say at my assault trial not guilty. B times had it coming. Seriously, though, violence against ladies is bad. Any violence against anyone, for that matter. But damn, it would have felt good. Stay in school. Don't biff the half-pipe kids. Story 14. Had a friend object at my first wedding. He came right up to the altar, spouting off about all my shortcomings. Myself and my groomsmen all leveled our guns at him, but he just wouldn't shut up. So we fired. He lay in a heap on the ground for the rest of the ceremony. Mind you, this was all planned. It was a piratey Renaissance wedding, and the guns were a black powder. Sans the shot, of course. We all played our pots a bit too well, though a few of the more gullible guests thought there had been a legit murder at the wedding at first. It was awesome. Story 15. I was tempted to speak up as I knew the bride wasn't really into the groom. It was a weird Baptist semi-arranged marriage thing. Needless to say, the bride was a bit of a wild child, so I didn't see a marriage to a minister lasting. I said nothing though, and made an excuse to leave in a hurry. Anyway, the wheels started to come off during the honeymoon, and she ended up sleeping with his brother, who was the black sheep of the family and who had only returned for the wedding. Cool guy. They ended up having a kid together. Story 16. I wasn't born yet, but it is a funny family story. I have a very large extended family. Mom has 6 brothers and 3 sisters. One Uncle C, the 4th son, got married. It was fairly obvious that most of his siblings didn't care for his wife-to-be. The day before the wedding, Uncle C got hurt at work, sliced open his hand and needed a lot of stitches. He was given very strong painkillers. During the ceremony, Uncle C was high on painkillers and started to feel lightheaded. While in the middle of saying their vows, he began to wander off stage, and my Uncle L stood up and began cheering. Uncle L then shouted, "Attaboy." CL's wife pulled him back into the pew and shushed him. Later in the ceremony, Uncle C and his wife were kneeling in the church, doing some prayer thing. As Uncle C was facing away from the guests, everyone could see the bottoms of his shoes. One of my uncles had painted "Help Me" on the soles of his dress shoes. Story 17. When I married my DH, one of my closest friends was in seminary. I asked her to stand up for me and bless our marriage during the ceremony. Although I'm not particularly religious, my husband is, and I thought it would be meaningful for my dear friend to lend her blessing to our marriage. She acted thrilled to do so and did a lovely job at the ceremony. Then at the reception, she cornered my new husband and scolded him for marrying me, telling him that since he's a Christian and I'm not, we were unequally yoked and in the eyes of the Lord should not have married. She then informed him that it was his job as the head of the family to bring me to Christ. I happened to walk up to them just as she finished admonishing him. He was sheet white, but I didn't learn the full extent of the conversation until later. I ended our friendship, obviously, at which point she tried giving me one of those. I'm sorry if you were offended. Apologies, I don't miss her. Story 18. My grandfather humorously objected to my parents marrying, despite having given them his blessing. He held up a photo of my dad with 2 black eyes, a bleeding cheek and a muddy face, university rugby game, and asked the wedding crowd, "Would you let this man marry your daughter?" Everyone laughed and said no. Years later, us kids still hear the story at family gatherings. 20 years on, when my granddad moved, Dad mailed the new neighborhood photos of my 70-year-old grandfather with pink-dyed hair with a caption, "Would you let this man live in your neighborhood?" We didn't find out till weeks later, and that's how I learned that revenge is a dish best served cold. It's not quite 5 minutes after the objection, but, oh well. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.